Hello everyone, today I'm going to teach you how to solder some basic connections. This is some basic soldering tips and methods that I use. You can also use this for marine connections, waterproof connections. If you're installing something like this fish finder, you might want to use a waterproof connection. Regardless as to what your needs are, at some point every homeowner is going to need to solder something. Before I go any farther, I'm going to ask you to hit the subscribe button. And then also check out the links below in the comments. They're tied back to all the different tools and products you're going to see here in order to make your perfect soldering connection. So let's get started with the soldering gun. This one here is a 18-watt Weller standard soldering gun, something that the average homeowner might have. The power here is great for the typical wires that a homeowner might be soldering. However, if you're going to solder some thicker wires, for example, the wires that might be on your battery terminals or cables that connect to your battery terminals for your car, that wire is a lot thicker, and this soldering iron is not going to do the job. You'd have to buy something that's probably 3 times as expensive, but has the power needed to melt the solder. The other thing you're going to need is solder. You have 2 basic choices, leaded and lead-free. These 2 here both are rosin core, but this is lead-free, this one's leaded. I would select the leaded every single time simply because the melting point is a lot lower, which means it's going to take a lot less power to heat up the wire and melt the solder to create that bond you need. The other thing is you want to be careful of the fumes that are created by lead core solder. So I have this fan installed here to basically blow the fumes away from the workplace so I'm not inhaling them. You might need some wire strippers, a wet sponge, and I'll explain why in a moment, and this helping hands works. But before we go any farther, what I don't like is on these helping hands these little alligator clips. They're pretty pointy there, and I want to make sure that they do not damage the wire. So we're going to put some shrink wrap on here and heat it up with a heat gun so that way it protects our work. One of the things you're going to need to do is protect your workspace from some hot solder. So I'm just using a piece of roof flashing here, or a couple pieces of it anyway, to create my little workspace where the solder will be dripping. And I don't want to damage this beautiful workbench here that's got stains all over it already, but we don't want to have any kind of additional damage to this or potential burns or fire, so we want to use this. Also, you might not be soldering on a workbench. The first thing you want to do now is put some rosin electrical flux on the connection. When I started this video, I told you that this soldering iron, this Weller 18-watt soldering iron, is really made for home projects and not for thicker wires. Well, these 2 wires here that we're going to join together, they're not really thick, but when you actually look at it, you've got two wires joined together in the center, and I'm concerned that the smaller soldering iron might not do the job. So at this point, I am going to introduce one to you that is more powerful. It is that Weller that I spoke about, the universal 100 watt soldering iron. This one is definitely more powerful, and you're going to see the difference here when we use it to solder these two together. So what you want to do is press the trigger, get the soldering iron hot, and then you want to use this wet sponge to wipe off any oxidation and excess solder from the prior use. You can see a little bit of solder coming off on the sponge right now. Once you've wiped it off, you want to tin the tip. Now we want to heat up the wires and get that flux all hot. You can see it boiling. Now we can apply the solder. The solder is going to melt all the way through the wires down to the bottom. Now that it's cooled, let's take the wires off and take a look at the joint here. So the solder, as you can see, is all the way through. I'm trying to get it to focus here for you. Hopefully you can see that. All the way through the wires, completely coating all of them right through. That is extremely solid. I can't even bend it. In fact, it's probably more solid there than it is in the rest of the wire. Next, I'm going to show you a waterproof connection, and I'm going to use these two wires here, and they're solid wires. I'm going to connect them this way rather than twist, and then we're going to waterproof them afterwards. I want to tin both wires first. I'm going to add a little bit of the flux. I'm getting the soldering iron hot, and I'm going to heat up the flux and then touch the wires with the solder. Okay, and do the other side too. Now I've got the wires positioned together with using the helping hands. They're touching. And I'm going to turn the soldering iron on. Apply some solder. If you notice, what I did not do was apply the solder right to the soldering iron. You never want to do that. You want the heat below the work and the solder above the work, and basically as if the solder was going to travel through the material that you're trying to solder. This should be cool now. Take it off and check out our joint. That's extremely solid. Now waterproofing it. So if these are just short pieces of wire. If we were going to be working on an actual project, we would have this shrink wrap tube already onto one of the wires that you're going to be soldering. And we talked about a waterproof joint. I'm not entirely comfortable just sliding this over here and heat shrinking it. I want to have something else to help keep the water out. I know that some people use silicone. I've heard some positive and negative things about that, like potentially the silicone not interacting well with the wires. So I'm going to actually use some liquid tape or liquid electrical tape. So liquid electrical tape can be used to create these watertight seals on wires in combination with the shrink wrap. So I'm just going to apply a small amount of liquid tape. See, I don't think there's such thing as a small amount when you use this stuff. I'm going to slide the shrink wrap over. And then we're going to use the heat gun. Now you see how it started to ooze out of the either end. That's exactly what you want. It's helping to create that tight seal, that watertight seal. That will dry in short order and you'll be ready to go. One of the biggest mistakes that I've always made when I first started soldering was thinking that I could put, a wire and a wire and put the soldering iron right on it and melt the solder off of the soldering iron and having it dripping onto the work. That is, the absolute wrong way to do it, and which is why I could never really solder anything until I learned. Hopefully this video helps you. Once again, please subscribe, and looking forward to having you visit me for some of my other videos. Thank you.